that recently, I think it was 2 days ago, the HHS and CDC removed the COVID mRNA shot from the childhood immunization schedule, and I think that was the correct move. But I also think it's something that Joe Ladapo had been talking about for a couple years, just based on the data that we had, based on what we knew about COVID, what we knew about the mRNA shots, and how that got added was not evidence-based. It was more just basically following whatever the narrative was at the time. So when he came out for that and Florida was there, oh my gosh, the wailing and the carping and everything like that. But the reality was, you know, his job and our job is not to just follow the crowd or follow narratives, but to actually follow the evidence. And that's what Joe did. I think that's what they're doing now. And I mean, I think a lot of parents got it because the uptake was incredibly low for this, because they saw that there was not a proven benefit. I don't even get into whatever, you know, negative effects would be. There wasn't a proven benefit. So I want to thank him for his leadership there, and I'm glad that now we're seeing that reflected in Washington, D.C. Now, we are here today to discuss one specific issue regarding medical practice and litigation. But before I do that, there's kind of a broader context that we're here. Since I've been governor, we have worked. When I became governor in 2019, Florida was considered what they termed it a judicial hellhole. And part of that is because we had an activist judiciary, which really wreaked havoc in this state for many, many decades across a wide variety of issues. When I became governor, though, there is a 7-member court. It was a 4-3 split in the wrong direction. 3 of the 4, though, had mandatory retirement. So when I got sworn in, they had to leave the court. So I was able to make 3 appointments, and we've really transformed the court from that activist bastion where good reforms would just be batted down, more on political grounds than anything, into one that's much more predictable in upholding the law. And that's not even true in a medical context. It's true in the business context. It's true in individual freedoms as well. So that really, the Supreme Court change was absolutely huge. And, you know, there have been things that had been passed by voters in the past many decades that court would nullify effectively. And then the legislature would do a lot of things, and they would nullify. So those days are over, and that effectively ended judicial activism in the state of Florida just my first month in office. But we also had the fact that Florida was a haven for frivolous litigation. And, you know, there are times when people's rights are at stake, people have been harmed, and they have every right to go into court and to seek compensation. But what happens is that when you have the floodgates open, there's an incentive for lawyers to bring cases, knowing that if someone sues you, even if you are 100% in the right, just the cost of having to defend that can be very, very prohibitive. And so a lot of times, if lawyers drive cases, it's cheaper for you to do a settlement, even if you did anything wrong, because taking it all the way to verdict, and if you win 100%, you had to pay all these fees for attorneys and for defense just to be able to effectively show that you weren't in the wrong at all. So that creates a lot of distortions in the economy, and imposes costs on our economy and our society. And certainly we've seen things like auto insurance rates and things of that nature driven in large part because Florida had been such a haven for so many litigation and really earned that moniker as being a litigation nightmare. We have done a lot over the years to do really significant litigation reform, and that goes all the way back to 2019 when we curbed the unchecked use of so-called assignment of benefits that allowed third-party contractors to sue insurers directly. That drove up costs and clogged the courts with really a flood of lawsuits. And you think about it, it's like you have a policy, you have a claim, and this becomes like a cottage industry to assign that benefit and this and that clearly got out of hand. So the legislature was able to pass legislation I signed to curb that. We also continued to build off that in 2021 and 2022 with reforms to how property insurance litigation has happened. And basically, Florida was one of a few states that said if somebody sues and they win, then they get attorney's fees. But if they sue and they lose, the other side does not get attorney's fees. Well, that's a major incentive to bring litigation. And so that is not free. That imposed costs. As those costs are put through the system, that helps drive the price that people pay for normal products and the premiums that they pay for that. So that had been something that had been very difficult to do, and yet it's now been a little more than 2 years since those insurance reforms were done, and the results are S&P Global said in 24, the first full year that was in effect, Florida had the lowest increase in property insurance in the entire country out of all 50. Who would have thought that? And the reason is just because you're removing this incentive to litigate even when there really shouldn't be litigation. It makes it less costly. That's why so many people are coming in to do business in Florida. California, they're all leaving for insurance. Like the people that had the fires, they're leaving. Florida, we've had companies moving in since these reforms. Who would have thought that? This is a state that's the most complex insurance market for property in the country, maybe even in the world. We've had 6 major hurricanes in 7 years. I know people in Southwest Florida are very familiar with the last few years in particular, and yet, so far this year, you're basically seeing the rates be stable. You haven't seen them go up 30% like they were prior to these reforms. So that's something that's been meaningful. It has added stability. You have seen more people come into the market. There's just no question that that's the case. Then the following year, 2023, the legislature passed and I signed a broader tort reform and litigation reform, even outside the context of property insurance, and that I think that's had, people could tell you, small businesses. It's had a positive effect here, but on auto insurance rates. So far this year, the average auto insurance from the major companies is down 4 or 5% in Florida. It's up almost everywhere else, and auto insurance has been the #1 inflationary item across the country over the last 4 years, and the only reason Florida saw a decrease, our drivers aren't getting any better, I can tell you that. It's a tough nut to crack, it just is. But the reason why is because of the litigation reform. I mean, that's the reason why. And you talk to any company, why are they able to offer more affordable rates? Well, it's because we've removed the incentive to litigate first and ask questions later, and that has reduced costs throughout the system. So this has been a lot of heavy lifting. There have been people that have been involved in Florida government and the political scene for like 25 years who've been trying to get legal reform to get us more in line with what works. And you can see some of these things in different parts of the country. Texas did litigation reform, and they had positive results. Other states, honestly, even states like California have done some that you wouldn't think, but even they have done in certain areas. So that's what you do. Now, these Republicans in the legislature have voted for these reforms, and they've been praised for the reforms. You had a movement in the House of Representatives to undo the tort reforms that have been done and enacted in Florida and that had shown to have produced stability in some of these really, really tricky markets. And it failed in every instance except one to even advance past the House. The Florida Senate said they wouldn't consider it. I was not going to support what they were doing. Now, the one bill that they did was a bill to undo legal reform and tort reform Not anything that was done under my tenure, though, something that had been done many decades ago in the early 1990s when Florida was facing a crisis in malpractice insurance premiums and lawsuits that were driving premiums high. Physicians were leaving the state. It really had a bad impact on access to care. So the Florida legislature overhauled how medical malpractice actions are done in these instances of the wrongful death. And what they did was they did something that some states also do. I think it's a minority of states that have Florida right now. I think it may have been some more at the time. But what they basically said is, medical negligence, obviously you have a right to go in and get compensation. If something happens to you, of course, you can do that. But they limited 2 instances to where you could sue for economic damages, but you couldn't sue for so-called non-economic damages. And those 2 classes were if you had an adult child age 25 or older who was not dependent on a parent with no surviving spouse. If you had an action, that 25 or older independent child could sue and get economic damages, but they could not sue for so-called non-economic damages. And the same would apply if a parent was suing on behalf of a 25 or older minor or child, independent child with no surviving spouse or no heirs. You can sue for the economic damages, but not. And the question is, well, why did they do that? And they did it because when you talk about economic damages, those are quantifiable. You can say you were harmed, here's the damage, and you can recover. When you do non-economic, it is basically what a jury wants to award. Now, that's something that's very appealing if you're a plaintiff's attorney, because if you can get a contingency fee out of a big award, you can make millions and millions of dollars potentially on an individual case. So it was the legislature's view that limiting to economic damages would be a deterrent for cases being brought, across kind of in large numbers, right? And so that had been the law in Florida for many decades. What the legislature did this time is they repealed that portion of the medical malpractice reform. And, for me, I think that if you do, we have a right to expect that physicians are going to meet appropriate standards. There's a lot that goes into it. I mean, the state of Florida provides a lot of support for training physicians and everything. And if somebody is careless, and certainly even worse, there needs to be accountability. But I think the question is in a case like this, what's the best way to do that? Is it to open floodgates for non-economic damages, knowing you're going to get a lot of lawsuits that are going to be brought against a lot of physicians who weren't necessarily negligent, right? Because when you're practicing medicine, you can do everything right, and you may not get a good outcome with the patient. There's not a warranty of cure. These are difficult things. Sometimes there's pluses and minuses for what a physician would do. Physician will consult the patient, tell them that here are the options, and sometimes a patient will opt for a course of treatment or a surgery, knowing that there's high odds that it may not be successful. And all these things are very sad, whether the physician was perfect or whether the physician was not. If somebody doesn't make it through that, that is a tragedy in one form or another. And the loss for a family member, even in someone that's an adult and independent at that point, is real. And I think everybody appreciates that. I think the question, though, is what would this legislation do for costs of health care in Florida, access to care in Florida, and our ability to recruit and keep physicians? And I know you're going to hear from people today, but it's their judgment. It's also my judgment that if this legislation would be enacted, it would lead to higher costs for Floridians. It would lead to less access to care for Floridians, and it would make it harder for us to keep, recruit, and maintain physicians in the state of Florida. And we need more as it is now. The state's not shrinking, it's growing. Population continues to age. You're going to need more and more there. So what could have been done that would have made this acceptable? Well, I think two things could be done. One is focus on holding the physician directly accountable with regulatory actions. See, you do a malpractice suit, the physician doesn't pay it, it's the insurance company that pays it. So it's not a perfect or even a great deterrent for medical negligence. A third party is paying the costs. We have disciplinary procedures in place, but if there's ways to do that so that folks are held accountable, I'm all for that. The other thing that can be done to prevent this from opening up the floodgates of a lot of litigation is put caps on the damages. If you want to do non-economic damages, put caps on the amount of damages and cap the amount that attorneys can recover. If you do that, then you are totally disincentivizing frivolous lawsuits, because they'll know there's a limited amount that an attorney is going to be able to recover. And if you think about it, if you have no caps on the non-economic damages, that is an incentive to bring a lot of cases, and many of them probably won't be successful, but even then you can probably get a settlement. Again, even if you haven't done anything wrong, there's going to be an incentive to settle, because it's very costly to go through with all this. And then, of course, if you can get a jury to do a big verdict, then the lawyer's going to get a lot of the money there. And sometimes, they're getting 30-35% of what would be awarded to an individual client, or in this case, one of the relatives. So that will incentivize more lawsuits. I'm very much convinced of that. So I told the legislature this going by, and I know they did try to do a cap on the non-economic damages. So they're opening that up, but capping it, and then also limiting the amount that attorneys can recover. If you did that, I don't think you would see a major impact on the healthcare delivery system. I don't think you'd see a major impact on malpractice insurance rates, and I don't think you would see a major impact on access to care. But the legislature did this years ago for a reason, because they were responding to something that was spiraling out of control, and I don't think that what they've proposed here is going to put us on the strong foot without these additional safeguards. So for that reason, I'm announcing that we will be vetoing that legislation. I have been in contact with some of the legislators, particularly in the Senate. I think the change to do the caps failed by one vote in the Florida Senate, and it was something that was, there's some people that don't want to change this at all, but I think of those people, that's something you can live with if you have some caps on it. So if you look around the country, Florida is a minority that says no recovery in these limited instances for non-economic damages, but the vast majority of state have caps on what can be recovered in terms of non-economic damages. And if you don't have those caps, then you really are incentivizing a lot more litigation to take place in the state of Florida. None of that is free lunch. Somebody will have to pay for it. And unfortunately, I think if this bill became law, I do think the cost would be borne by the physicians who would potentially flee the state, to people that wouldn't have as much access to care, and then also to the cost that would go up as a result of it. And we consulted a lot of folks that are involved in the healthcare sector, and I think it was pretty much unanimous that the way this current bill was structured would not have a positive impact on healthcare in Florida, and could potentially have some really significant negative impacts. So I want to appreciate everybody that provided their feedback on this. They were one vote away from doing something that I think was a little bit more palpable for a lot of folks, but it just didn't end up working out that way. So I'm going to let some other folks talk, and then we'll take some questions. So we'll start with our Surgeon General, Dr. Joseph Ladapo.
Thanks, Governor. So good morning, everyone. Oh, there are more people in the room than I realized when I came in. Happy to see you guys. This is such a beautiful part of the state. I have had the privilege of flying in with the governor this morning, and this part of the state is it's really, really gorgeous. So, we're talking about this legislation. The governors make a decision to veto it, and one of the things that I appreciate the governor. I like the guy a lot. But one of the things that I really admire about him, and a lot of other people do too, and it's a major part of why he's been so successful, is because he is able to demonstrate leadership. And you would think we have a lot of leaders, right? Leaders in name in this country, right? Every city's got them, every county's got them, every state's got them, every country's got them. But unfortunately, there's such a shortage of leadership. It's like looking for water out in the middle of the Mojave Desert or something like that. There's just such little leadership out there, and it is a travesty. And and what does leadership mean? Leadership means doing what you authentically believe is the right thing to do. And what is the right thing to do? Well, most people never actually answer that question. Who are leaders? Right? So they do what most everyone else is doing, and they go the direction most everyone else is going. And the governor. I was very happy that Secretary Kennedy and other members of HHS leadership, like Dr. Bhattacharya and Dr. Makari, made the announcement that they would be pulling the mRNA COVID-19 vaccines from the childhood schedule. In May 2025, we finally had that announcement, and we made that announcement almost 3 years ago. And it was the right thing to do then. It's obviously the right thing to do now, belatedly, but it's absolutely the right thing to do, and that's what leadership means. It means doing the right thing. And boy, I don't know how many people remember that announcement, but we heard about it. We heard about it, quite extensively. I got many earfuls for a while about it, but it was the right thing to do, and it was something that the governor and I had discussed, and it was very clearly the right thing to do based on the evidence. And this is a different issue, but it's also the right thing to do. I went to medical school. I went to medical school at Harvard. I've been in the news a lot lately, and I did a doctoral degree there also, a PhD in research science. And oh goodness, why the heck did I bring that up? Give me a second here. My thoughts are going to catch up with me in a moment. So I can't remember why the heck I brought that up. So I really can't remember. It's throwing me off. No, that's not it. All right. So with this issue of reforms and this veto decision, the lawmakers, right? So I went to medical school because that's my area. I'm a science guy. It nourishes me. It energizes me. I like to do that. My parents had mentioned law school to me when I was younger. It was not the right direction for me, and I didn't go that direction. So I'm cautious as I talk about legal things because it's not at all my thing. I'm just absolutely not an expert in that area. But I've been reading about different policies that different states have in this area of tort. And it's a tough area, right? Heart goes out to patients and their family members. It's obviously very difficult. And, as an aside, by the way, I'll share with you that the scientific research shows that probably one of the biggest predictors of lawsuits is, unfortunately, having terrible bedside manner. Doctors who, patients, by and large, know that things don't always go well. And, and most patients are actually very understanding as long as the physician really has humility and humanism around it. But when doctors are jerks, that's when they get in trouble. That's probably the biggest predictor of legal action. And that's an issue for the medical profession to work on. That's an important issue in the medical profession, undoubtedly. And many of us have seen many examples of poor bedside manner. But even that aside, the issue of justice, legal justice, economic damages, non-economic damages, there simply isn't enough justice to go around and have the system be able to stand up on its 2 feet. It's just not possible. And the right thing to do, just the wise thing to do in that situation is to have caps. It's frankly, it's insane to have a system with no caps on non-economic damages and expect for that system to continue to sustain itself and function as it was intended to function, which is to provide care for patients. That's just not possible. And so that has to be there. And fortunately, we have the leadership of Governor DeSantis, who, despite, I think it was pretty much overwhelmingly passed from what I recall in the news reports in the House and the Senate in terms of this bill. Unfortunately, it's not the wisest decision. And I please, lawmakers out there, forgive me. I didn't go to law school, but my sense, just scientifically as a clinician, is just thinking about the issue, is that it's an unwise decision. It will hurt. Undoubtedly, it will hurt the people of Florida. Like there's no gray in there. It's very black and white. It's going to hurt the people of Florida. It'll hurt the doctors. That'll trickle down to the patient. You better believe that doctors who are concerned about whether they're going to get sued provide different types of care. You better believe they do. Okay? And what you want is a doctor who is thinking about your interests when they're providing care for you, not about the risk of liability. That's not what you want as a patient. So, in addition to the reduction in really the type of care, the quality of the care, and I don't mean quality in an academic sense. I mean like people want good care, and in addition to harming that, it's going to make things even more expensive. And who needs that? I mean, this whole system is already just unrecognizable in terms of how distorted it is. I mean, healthcare is so expensive in this country, and what do we get for it, right? We get a bunch of paperwork, a bunch of systems and silos that don't talk to one another. Heaven help you if you're sick. I mean, if hopefully you'll recover, but are you ever going to make it through dealing with insurance companies and like the doctor's offices and the different whatever your out of pocket is and whatever the co-insurance is and all of this junk, and not to mention the mistakes that are made when insurance companies and healthcare offices are making these calculations. It's a total mess. The last thing we need is just policies that make it worse. And you have to cap this stuff. I mean, it's really insensible not to do that. So I'm glad the governor's making that decision. I believe it's the wise decision, the right decision for Floridians. I'm glad he's doing it. So thank you. Look forward to hearing from the perspective of some of our other speakers. Thanks.
Larry? Thank you. First, I want to welcome Governor DeSantis for being here today and welcome him to Lead Health and thank him for choosing Southwest Florida for this very, very important decision. I also want to thank Surgeon General Ladapo. Thank you for being here, and thanks to all of our distinguished guests here, especially our physicians and especially our physicians in training. We have physicians just beginning their careers now in residency programs, so thank you for being here and being a part of this. This is your future. We support this decision to veto this bill on many, many fronts. Most of all, access. We have an access challenge here in the state of Florida. We've all experienced it. And this is just a bill that will make that worse. We know that any barrier that you put between patients and physicians and hospitals is not the right decision to make. And this bill does that. It will clearly increase costs. It'll affect emergency services. When you think about high-risk specialties like obstetrics, emergency medicine, this is going to increase the cost. There's no doubt about it. And it will be a deterrent to the one thing that is critical for all of us, and that's the recruitment of physicians to this state. We, here at Lee Health, we are recruiting literally hundreds of physicians every year, and this is a deterrent. There are other places that people are going to want to go because of the risk of malpractice, and anything that increases that is not good policy, and it's not smart. People here in Southwest Florida and throughout the state deserve better. They deserve a strong, sustainable healthcare system, and this bill just simply doesn't do that. It's focused on legalities, it's focused on finance, but it's not focused on the patient. And I think we have to commend
Governor DeSantis for putting patients first and saying, you know what, this is not right. And again, we may be in the minority in the country on this, but we're in the right minority. So thank you, Governor. Thank you for being here. This veto will protect our patients and access and help keep costs down. So thank you, and thanks for the opportunity to speak.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Governor. Appreciate it. Really appreciate the opportunity to share some comments with you all this morning on, why I think that this veto is really important for our healthcare system here in Florida. Again, my name is Nick Panetta. I'm a surgeon in a large multi-specialty practice in Tampa. Every day I meet patients at some of the most vulnerable times in their lives. Women fighting cancer, families navigating uncertainty, individuals facing decisions that they never imagined having to be faced with. I can bet that most of us in this room, unfortunately, have found ourselves in that position, either dealing with an issue personally or helping a loved one or a family member through a challenging time. And because of that, I think we all know that behind each diagnosis is a real person, and behind every treatment is a team committed not just to achieving a good clinical outcome, but to really restoring that patient's dignity, hope, and quality of life. And I want to be really clear about something. When patients are harmed through negligence, they deserve access to justice, and I think we've heard that commented on this morning. But when there is real pain and there is real loss, that can't be ignored. But we must always hold ourselves as healthcare providers accountable to the highest standards of care. But accountability has to come and must exist within a framework that preserves access for all of us, right? Not just those with the means to pursue litigation. That's why today's veto really, really matters. If signed into law, HB 6017 would have really dismantled a carefully collaborated policy that strikes a necessary balance in Florida's medical liability system. Would it expanded non-economic damages in ways that, kind of while emotionally are resonant, they can carry very real consequences to the healthcare system. And removing these guardrails invites a significant increase in litigation, as we've heard, much of it speculative, which in turn is going to drive up malpractice premiums significantly. And those costs don't just stop with the providers. They ripple outward. They're affecting availability and affordability of care across our state. We're already grappling, as we've heard again, with a huge physician shortage. Population's growing. There just aren't enough bricks and mortar and docs to care for all the people that need good quality care. And this bill would have really made that problem worse. Particularly, that would apply in high-risk specialties like obstetrics and surgery, and unfortunately, it would be especially applicable if passed, hurting communities in the rural and underserved areas. For many patients, it's not just about the cost of their health care, it's about whether a doctor is really available to care for them at all. So we want families to feel confident that justice is accessible, but what we really want is also for every Floridian to be able to access care without fear of delay or fear of price barriers that may exist. So, Governor DeSantis, I want to sincerely thank you, for your leadership in protecting that balance. This veto is not about denying compassion. It's about preserving access, retaining talent that we badly need in the state of Florida, and ensuring that Florida remains a state where both patients and physicians can thrive. So thank you all very much for the opportunity today.
Good morning. My name is Andy Bolin. I'm a medical malpractice defense attorney here in the state of Florida. So I represent doctors and nurses and healthcare providers throughout the state against these medical malpractice cases. I want to thank Governor DeSantis for his incredible leadership in this tort reform arena over the past several years. Florida has become a place, because of litigation, that is unfriendly to the healthcare community. We've seen any protections that were available to physicians, including caps on non-economic damages, either be eroded or completely erased by our courts. And every single day, I represent physicians and watch them grapple with the impact of being sued in medical malpractice cases where they have support by other experts, where they have good, well-reasoned basis for their care. And it's important for everyone to understand that just because there's a negative outcome doesn't mean that there's malpractice. But unfortunately, so often in our cases, what we see is that the plaintiff's bar starts with the outcome of the case as opposed to the actual care of the case. These cases are very sad. They're very emotional, And your heart goes out to every single plaintiff that brings a case. They understandably, they have an emotional response to the outcome of the case, but it doesn't always mean that there's malpractice. And our clients are now facing sort of unprecedented times. I'm a Florida native. I've practiced in this area for 23 years, and I can tell you that right now our physicians are facing the highest medical malpractice insurance premiums in the United States of America. Also, when you look at studies that talk about severity, which is a term that speaks to whether or not or how much it costs to resolve cases, how much juries are awarding in cases, Florida's in the unenviable spot of being at the top of that list as well. So what Governor DeSantis has done with this bill is no small thing. It's very, very important that, and I appreciate his careful analysis of it, because as I've said, it's an emotional issue. There's no doubt that there are people that have suffered malpractice, but it is certainly, in my experience, the minority of patients who bring cases that have experienced that. And so my clients are not interested in seeing bad doctors protected. They're for accountability. But as has been said before, we need to make sure that we're doing it in a way that balances the system, that brings fairness and equality to the system so that we can protect access to care. This issue as to access of care, my clients and people like my clients came and they talked in front of the committees that considered this bill up in Tallahassee. And they talked about the challenges of physician recruitment and retaining physicians in the state of Florida. In past sessions, this isn't the first time this bill has been debated. In past sessions, we had folks that came from places like Texas that said one of their tactics in recruiting physicians away from places like Florida is to point out that they have caps on damages and that it's a safer, it's a better tort environment for them. You know, not only am I an attorney, but I'm also a consumer. I want my doctors making medical decisions based on what's best for my medical care, not practicing defensive medicine, ordering tests that may not be necessary simply because they don't want to face the question later of why didn't you order this unnecessary test. The access to care situation is not something that's theoretical. In the state of Florida right now, the March of Dimes put out a study publicly available where there are counties in Florida where there are no hospitals, birthing centers, or physicians that offer obstetrical care in the state of Florida. Doesn't seem possible. So we need to make sure that we're doing everything we can to engage physicians, to make sure that we have physicians that are not only going to be able to provide access to care, but that they're making decisions based on the quality of care. So again, on behalf of my clients, Governor DeSantis, I thank you for your leadership on this issue, and I look forward to working with lawmakers in the coming sessions to try and put together a bill that accomplishes what they're looking for, but also provides those reciprocal protections to the physicians in this state, because I think we have some of the best leaders in the state, in the country, right here in the state of Florida. So thank you very much again.
Well, I appreciate everybody's comments and their thoughtfulness. And again, this legislation, doesn't impact what are probably the more usual situations. That, if you have a medical malpractice with a surviving spouse, bill didn't address that. Minor children, bill doesn't address that. It's really this kind of unique, not unique, but probably less prevalent, where you have someone that's over the age of 25 and is independent, that the legislature in the past has said you can sue for economic damage. People acted like you couldn't sue at all when this bill was being done. That's not true. You could sue and recover economic damages on behalf of that family member, but the legislature previously had limited the non-economic damages. And I think the reality is just because that would have invited a lot of lawsuits, and it would have caused more costs on the system. If you have caps, you can disincentivize the litigate first mentality. But I do think that we want accountability. It does not need to be in the form of a lawsuit all the time. In fact, having regulatory and professional accountability, be swift, that probably would be more of a deterrent for negligent physicians than what this bill seeks to accomplish. And so I'm all for that. But if you are going to unwind what was done 30, 40 years ago, and do this non-economic damages in these two limited circumstances, you got to have caps on the amounts, and you got to have caps on the attorney's fees. That will protect the access to care. It will protect the cost from spiraling out of control. It will make it so that we can still recruit and maintain physicians. And so they came close to doing that. They didn't quite get it over the finish line. But I think for all the reasons that people have said, that as currently constructed, this bill would have a lot of negative impacts in a variety of ways across our healthcare system. Okay, anybody have any questions? So on the UF presidential, I appoint people to the boards of trustees and the board of governors, and they do these searches, and they bring in candidates. And so with the respect for the University of Florida, I don't know the candidate. He was the president of the University of Michigan, which is usually considered one of the top public universities in America, and he wants to come to Florida. Now, people have pointed out a lot of statements that he has made that are not exactly what we're looking for in a state where woke goes to die. And I cringe at some of these statements. But basically, I think the folks that were involved in the search, after having interviewed him, spent time with him, it's their judgment that he's really kind of reached the limit on the campus leftism, and he would want to leave Michigan, where that is prevalent, to Florida, where it's frowned upon, because he wants to be more in line with what Florida is doing in our policies. And they really believe that. Now, there's other folks that haven't necessarily talked to him. They see all these, and they're like, you can't do it. So he's going to go in front of the board of governors, and I appointed all those folks, and so they'll make the judgment. But people are saying, well, you could have a woke here. No, that's not going to happen, because if he were to go in and do that, he will lose his job in Florida. We have expectations about what we want in higher education. We don't want it to be a fountain of activism or leftist indoctrination. And if you go in that direction, then you will not have support to continue. And so either way, we will continue to have a higher education system that's really leading the way. Our expectations are clear, not only in law, which we have, such as by eliminating DE&I, but also in other actions that we have taken. And those expectations will need to be met one way or another. When we had the Hamas stuff breaking out across the country, and you had this stuff at Columbia University, all these other places, people said, oh man, it's not happening in Florida. I wonder why. Well, it wasn't a mystery why. If a president of a university in Florida allowed that to happen, they would no longer be the president of a university in the state of Florida. It's just that simple. So we have expectations for it, but I've appointed these people to do their job. I wasn't the one that picked the candidate or this or that. It's my view is let them do their job, let the process unfold. But however it works out, we will continue on the direction that we will, one way or another.
The city of Naples just lost an appeal to stop a drag show from Florida next weekend in Central Park. Of course, the president of that state law is still blocked. How far is the state willing to take this fight to the Supreme Court?
We are going to protect the innocence of our children. Why would it be problematic to say you can't do this stuff that's sexually explicit in front of minors? That used to not even be something that would be questioned. Now somehow you have folks going into court and they really want to push the envelope on this stuff. And I want Florida to be family friendly. We fought the fight about the schools with the particularly for the young grades, about are you going to be like California where you report to second grade and you're not learning math or English, you're learning about changing genders? That's unacceptable. And we laid down the marker here. So parents in Florida should know that we're on their side, and these kids should not be robbed of their innocence. So when you have some of this stuff where you'd have these establishments where you could have minors in there, and that's not consistent with good policy. So we stand for the protection of the children, and we're going to continue to do that.
With the state budget still in limbo, are you concerned that this sales tax holiday
Well, it already has been effective. I mean, you remember I proposed a Second Amendment tax holiday that was supposed to start on Memorial Day weekend. So you would have had a lot of folks that would have been able to go out and bought ammunition, bought firearms, and not had to pay any tax on it. Now, we're still going to, I think, get that enacted, but it will be over a different period of time. And so, you only have one job, real job in the legislature, and that's to do the appropriations and to do the budget. The policy changes, you can do it, but you're not required to change any policy. You're not required to pass new laws. A lot of times they pass laws that it's not like more laws or better laws, right? I mean, as we've seen. So that's the one thing that they're supposed to do. They ended at the beginning of May without really much of a way forward. It's not clear to me that they have a better way forward. I have opinions on why that is, and at the appropriate time, you'll hear me articulating those. But you should have already had sales tax relief, and that's something that's meaningful to a lot of Floridians. When you say you're not going to have to do any sales tax, if you're making purchases that are hundreds of dollars, sometimes even more than that, I mean that adds up pretty quickly, and that's helpful for people. So we need to do that. We need to continue doing the holidays we do. We're just starting hurricane season. Why would we not want to do disaster preparedness holidays so you can load up tax-free on what you need in case? Now, look, knock on wood, hopefully we get a respite from hurricane this year. And in reality, they do kind of come in bunches, and then sometimes you'll have several years where you don't have any. So hopefully we get into a respite here. But we can't assume that. We've got to prepare as if we're going to have. People have really used that in big ways. We also proposed a summer tax holiday on marine fuel. People want to go boating and go fish. You get the fuel tax free. That's something that was very popular. People want to do. Of course, we do back to school tax holidays, which are good for parents, and on and on. So we should just keep doing that. It's been something that's been successful. And then, what I've been saying is, we don't have an income tax. We have one of the lowest per capita tax burdens for state, if not the lowest in the country, certainly one of the lowest 3 or 4. But what people are saying with tax is local property tax relief. That's what people want. I propose to do relief this year, leading into next year, where we're going to put it on the ballot so that, we can just assure people actually own their homes, and that they don't have to pay rent to the government for their entire existence. That's not the way this was supposed to be. And honestly, I think it would be huge for the state of Florida. And I think policy-wise, it would have very positive context. Some people complain about, and understandably, they'll complain about, some of these like big companies buying up a lot of homes, right? And they want people to rent. It raises the price. Well, if you do property tax where individual residents don't have to pay tax, but the investors still have to, that's a way to really blunt that. That's going to make home ownership more affordable or more attractive for working people who want, that's their primary residence. It's not going to be as attractive for speculators. So there's a lot of great things that can happen from that, but we got to get it done, and we got to get it done in a really resounding way. So I know that the voters have been very clear about what they want. I want to see a down payment this year, and then I want to see this on the ballot in 2026. And you guys are going to be able to have an opportunity potentially to vote for something that's going to be really, really big. And here's the thing: you absolutely can structure it in a way where all the things that people want can still be done. Don't let them tell you you're not going to have a police department on this. That's not true. Ask them how much their budgets have grown administratively over the last 3 or 4 at the county, and I mean, it's a lot, right? So there's a lot that you can do, and I just think it's such a great opportunity to be able to get this done. But if you think about Florida and what we've done, so right now we have the second lowest per capita spending levels in the country, and that's significant. New York has 3 million fewer people than we do. Their budget's over twice the size of our budget. We have the smallest number of state government workers per capita in the entire country. If you look at all of Florida's debt over 180 years, as a state. Just since I've been governor, we've paid down 41% and counting and doing more. We have the lowest per capita state debt of any state in the United States. Your share as a Florida resident of our state debt's about $400. Your share of the federal debt as a U.S. citizen is over $105,000. Theirs is escalating, ours is declining. So we have managed this exceptionally well working with the legislature. Look, I've had to veto spending. One year I vetoed 3% of the budget. Some years I don't do as much. It just depends on what's put in front of me. But we've done that while also doing record investments in things like Everglades restoration. We're going to open the reservoir over here in Southwest Florida, I think probably next month. That's going to be huge. You remember in 2018 they had all these discharges from Lake Okeechobee. Now the Army Corps does it. It's not the state. I wasn't governor yet, but we've come in and we've built all this infrastructure. We have things flowing well, water quality improved. We put huge resources behind that because that's what people wanted to see, and that's the right thing for the state. We've accelerated road projects and infrastructure projects. Now you guys don't do I-4 as much down here. We just opened a temporary lane expansion in Polk County area. Huge cut to the commute times. And then when the whole project's done, it's going to be amazing. We've put money into that. We've gave money for teacher salary increases to the school districts, billions of dollars over the last 3 or 4 years. So we're doing these big things. We're cutting taxes, paying down debt, having a very responsible budget. And so that is not the type of scenario where you would expect a budget impasse. Like literally, if you can't agree, just copy and paste what we've been doing. This is not rocket science, and I think that there's reasons why it's gotten to this point, but we're going to have to get this done. We're going to have to do it for the state of Florida, and we're certainly not going to let the progress be derailed. Okay, thanks everybody. God bless you.